Robert Neville. I am a survivor living in New York City. I am broadcasting on all AM frequencies. I will be at the South Street Seaport every day at midday, when the sun is highest in the sky. If you are out there, if anyone is out there, I can provide food, I can provide shelter, I can provide security. If there's anybody out there, anybody, please, you are not alone.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal dioramas. Watches all the movies from comedy to drama. From the top, roll the sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtakes. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 321, I Am Legend. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. They're meant to fast forward the chapters on the Blu-ray where Sam gets infected and dies. Because they just make me too upset. Still, to this day, I can't watch a dog die on screen. I just can't. Welcome to Verbal Diorama. Whether you're a brand new listener, whether you're a regular returning listener, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. As always, I'm so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of I Am Legend. A huge thank you if you are a regular returning listener. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for continuing to listen and support this podcast. This podcast has been going for almost 7 years now, and I'm hugely grateful for your support. It genuinely means so much because, yes, even by listening to a podcast, you are still supporting that podcast, and I am so grateful for that support. And we are moving on from last week, which was Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, a movie that almost ended in catastrophe, but didn't, thanks to Austin Powers, to a movie that has a future generic apocalyptic catastrophe, but that also has a great Will Smith performance and a thoughtful, occasionally insightful, often deviating adaptation of Richard Matheson's novel of the same name. Here's the trailer for I Am Legend.
I'm not infected. I'm not infected. Please.
Nothing happened the way it was supposed to happen. 6 billion people on Earth when the infection hit. I'm a survivor living in New York City. I will be at the South Street Seaport every day at midday when the sun is highest in the sky. Now just sleep. Eat your vegetables. Don't just push them around. Eat them. I'm not playing. Morning, Hank. Midway through the G's. God didn't do this. We did.
scientist Robert Neville was unable to stop the spread of a terrible virus that was incurable and man-made. Now the last human survivor in what is left of New York City and perhaps the world, for 3 years Neville has faithfully sent out daily radio messages, desperate to find any other survivors who might be out there. But Robert Neville is not alone. Mutant victims of the plague, the Dark Seekers, lurk in the shadows, watching his every move, waiting for him to make a fatal mistake. Perhaps mankind's last, best hope, Neville is driven by only one remaining mission: to find a way to reverse the effects of the virus using his own immune blood. But he knows he is outnumbered and quickly running out of time. Let's run through the cast of this movie. We have Will Smith as Dr. Robert Neville, Abby as Samantha, Alice Braga as Anna, Charlie Tayan as Ethan, Sally Richardson as Zoe Neville, Willow Smith as Marley Neville, Dash Mihawk as the alpha male, and Joanna Numata as the alpha female. I Am Legend has a screenplay by Mark Protasevich and Akiva Goldsman and was directed by Francis Lawrence. So the story for this really starts with Richard Matheson, and he proved influential for many modern vampire and zombie movies, most notably with Night of the Living Dead, taking inspiration from him, as well as movies like 28 Days Later. It makes sense that his 1954 post-apocalyptic novel, I Am Legend, would inspire Hollywood cinema with its own adaptations. I Am Legend itself was influenced by Mary Shelley's 1826 novel, The Last Man. But unsurprisingly, I Am Legend is not the only adaptation of I Am Legend. In 1964, Vincent Price starred in The Last Man on Earth, based on I Am Legend, and with a screenplay written in part by Matheson himself. But he was dissatisfied with the result and chose to be credited under the pseudonym Logan Swanson. The Last Man on Earth wasn't a commercial success, but it was a critical one. Matheson would say that while it was faithful to his novel, Price was miscast as protagonist Dr. Robert Morgan, with weak and unintelligent vampiric creatures that are repelled by garlic and sunlight, and that, quote, aren't very over the top but don't seem very threatening either, unquote. The movie The Last Man on Earth is now in the public domain, so if you come across it on the internet, have a watch. Charlton Heston then starred in The Omega Man in 1971. Set in California in 1977, it depicts the aftermath of a nuclear war between the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union that has decimated life on Earth. Dr. Robert Neville is the only immune survivor, killing members of the family, plague victims that have transformed into an intelligent race of albino mutants with poor eyesight. Like The Last Man on Earth, Richard Matheson wasn't that taken with The Omega Man, stating, quote, "The Omega Man was so removed from my book that it didn't even bother me," unquote. Warner Brothers owned the rights to Matheson's novel since 1960, and in the 1990s, science fiction horror movies started to become more mainstream. The 90s had led to some scientific breakthroughs, like the start of the Human Genome Project and the cloning of Dolly the sheep. And along with that science came the resulting conversations about the ethics and morals of science, and what would happen to humanity if we took science too far or messed around too much with nature. Jurassic Park took the idea of creating dinosaurs from DNA. Species talked about an alien-human hybrid wanting to mate with humans. Event Horizon created a haunted house in space, and Dark City was a city in perpetual night where aliens experimented on the human mind. The idea that humans could unwittingly create a virus that made most of the population into mindless zombie vampire creatures wasn't outside of the realm of Hollywood possibility. Warner Brothers hired Mark Protasevich to write the script for a new version of I Am Legend. After they were impressed with this spec script for The Cell, which would end up being released in 2000, starring Jennifer Lopez, Vince Vaughn and Vincent D'Onofrio, directed by Tarsum Singh. Protasevich's script for I Am Legend was fast-tracked by Warner Brothers, with Neil H. Moritz joining as producer. It featured many things that would end up in the finished film, but the Dark Seekers, or Hemocytes, were more civilized, acting more like the creatures in The Omega Man, with the Hemocyte joining forces with Robert Neville and Anna being a lone heroin addict. In early 1997, Ridley Scott signed on to direct I Am Legend. Scott wasn't impressed with the original script by Mark Protosevich and hired screenwriter John Logan to create a new draft. Scott envisioned the project as a blend of blockbuster and art film, planning to trim dialogue to the bone with the first act being almost silent. He wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger cast as the lead character Robert Neville, and the pair met in June 1997. Scott wanted to reinvent Schwarzenegger's on-screen persona, showing the action star struggling with grief and depression without relying on his typical quips. Both men had been involved in genre-defining sci-fi before, Scott directing Alien and Blade Runner, and Schwarzenegger starring in the Terminator series and Total Recall. While the studio considered other A-listers like Tom Cruise, Mel Gibson and Michael Douglas, Schwarzenegger was the first choice for Scott's version. By July 1997, production was scheduled to start that September, with locations already lined up. John Logan's version of the I Am Legend script was a mix of sci-fi and psychological thriller, without dialogue in the first hour and with a somber ending. Its creatures were barbaric and animalistic, and the studio, concerned about commercial appeal and merchandising potential, because it's always about merchandising, began to worry they'd made a mistake in hiring Ridley Scott. Logan's script was dropped in favour of rewrites by Neil Jimenez, but Protosevich was rehired instead. Scott went full force into pre-production, enlisting Alec Guinness and Tom Woodruff Jr. at Amalgamated Dynamics for a 4-month design period for the creature makeup. They put together an elaborate makeup test for the mutant vampires. Now, we know these designs weren't used, but they should have been, because as the videos on YouTube show, they're beautifully designed practical creatures. Once the Ridley Scott version was cancelled, the team were contacted again when the Will Smith and Francis Lawrence version went ahead. However, as we know, we ended up with CG creatures, but I will pop the link to the original makeup tests in the show notes. So what happened to the Ridley Scott and Arnold Schwarzenegger version? Well, they weren't having the best years of their careers at the time. Scott's last 3 movies, 1492 Conquest of Paradise, White Squall and G.I. Jane, had all struggled at the box office, and Schwarzenegger's starring roles in Eraser and Batman and Robin had both underperformed at the box office. Big-budget sci-fi movies weren't selling, as Sphere and The Postman had proved, and to add to this concern, the budget for Scott's I Am Legend ballooned to $108 million, and in December 1997, the project was called into question as to the costs involved, and by March 1998, the studio cancelled I Am Legend due to the escalating budget and concerns over the box office potential. Rob Bowman was then hired to direct a new script by Mark Protosevich in August 1998, which was more action-focused, but Bowman would move on instead to direct Reign of Fire, which is episode 201 of this podcast. I Am Legend sat in development hell for a few years until 2002, when Schwarzenegger again entered the picture, this time as a producer, with Michael Bay his first choice of director and Will Smith his first choice for the starring role. And at the time, Will Smith was coming off an unparalleled streak as a leading man, with Independence Day and Men in Black proving his leading man credentials and his sense of humour, and Enemy of the State as a more serious role, which he then cemented further in Ali as the GOAT, Muhammad Ali. Bay and Smith were interested, but Warner Brothers president Alan F. Horn disliked the script, and once again I Am Legend was shelved. Smith would stay in everyone's minds though, and in 2004, Akiva Goldsman was hired to produce a new version of I Am Legend. Goldsman, who coincidentally wrote Batman and Robin and also produced Constantine, that probably won't come up again later in this episode at all, but Constantine was key really because the director of Constantine was Francis Lawrence, and Goldsman had previous experience working with him as a director. And so Lawrence was asked to direct I Am Legend in September 2005, with another rewrite of the script planned for Mark Protosevich, and Akiva Goldsman also stepped up to writing duties to distance it from recent zombie movies like 28 Days Later, with elements of Protasevich's script kept. Most importantly, Goldsman moved the script location from Los Angeles to New York to highlight the emptiness of the city, and more on the New York shoots in a bit. Francis Lawrence came to the movie with a desire to keep the start atmospheric and almost silent because he realised that silence could be effective cinema. In April 2006, it was confirmed Will Smith would star in I Am Legend, and he signed a pay-or-play deal, which basically means he would be paid regardless if the movie was made or not. He had also made a similar deal for Hancock, which was originally titled Tonight He Comes, with him scheduled to film that movie first in the summer of 2006, and then he would move on to I Am Legend. But delays to Hancock meant the movies essentially switched places, and I Am Legend had to become even more fast-tracked to fit into Smith's schedule. Smith had also wanted Guillermo del Toro to direct I Am Legend, but del Toro declined, preferring to work on Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. The production team of I Am Legend had 16 weeks of pre-production before filming began in September 2006. Smith would visit the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Washington to see a Level 4 lab, the most secure, where they experiment with biological hazards. He also met with a person who had been in solitary confinement and a former prisoner of war to research how loneliness and solitude affects mental health. He would say that Robert Neville was his toughest role since playing Muhammad Ali. The script would be constantly rewritten during production, mostly due to Smith's ad-libbing. And honestly, I'm just surprised, now that we are post-COVID, that with an airborne virus, no one in this movie thinks to wear a face mask. And this movie would mostly be the Will Smith show, with the first half of the movie showing Neville's solitude, his declining mental state, his resulting PTSD from the events before the movie, and his grief. It was announced in September 2006 that starring alongside him as his on-screen daughter Marley would be his real-life daughter Willow Smith. Sally Richardson would join as Neville's wife Zoe, who was originally named Ginny, and Alice Braga as Anna. There were unconfirmed reports that Gabrielle Union was being cast. Obviously, that never happened. There were also rumours circulating in September 2006 that Johnny Depp would be playing a character called Philip, a friend of Robert Neville. These were also confirmed as untrue, but several websites still picked up the Depp casting as gospel. The movie did manage to nab Emma Thompson, though, who goes uncredited for her role as Dr. Alice Crippen, the scientist who finds the cure for cancer by genetically engineering the measles virus, unwittingly creating a global pandemic. While Will Smith receives top billing, the real star of the movie is Abby, the dog actor who plays Samantha, aka Sam. Abby was a rescue from a California kennel. She wasn't a trained dog actor, but her rescuer was Steve Behrens, a dog trainer with 28 years of experience. Abby, who was 3 years old, was exactly the sort of dog Lawrence was looking for. And after just 3 weeks of intense training, Abby met Will Smith. Smith, for his part, fell in love with Abby and even tried to adopt her after filming because their relationship was so great during filming. Together, they worked on the film for 6 months, and Abby only refused to shoot one scene, which was, ironically, the play fetch scene. They instead used another 3-year-old German Shepherd called Kona, who had just given birth to a litter of puppies before filming. Abby and Kona were made up to look identical for filming. Abby was such a superstar, she did her own stunts too. Not only did she really walk on a treadmill in real life, the scene I still can't watch, where she starts to turn and Neville decides to end her life, Abby performed this herself. The trainer would get her to roll down Smith's arm into the ground, effectively playing dead. Smith was actually scared that she could get hurt, but Abby could just go completely limp on command. And the whole production adored Abby, and when all her scenes were shot, everyone could finally pet her. She passed away in 2019, aged 13, and I think we can all agree that Abby was the bestest girl. But back to filming, because this surprised me too when I found out about it. I Am Legend is shot in New York, in some of the busiest places on Earth. Grand Central Station, Fifth Avenue, and Washington Square Park. And honestly, Genuinely, I thought most of these scenes were CGI. But they're not. They filmed on those barren, empty, vegetation-growing streets for real. You can imagine Warner Brothers weren't keen on closing whole city blocks for filming, and they initially rejected Lawrence's idea to do so. But he was adamant it needed to add to this feeling of unease, and he didn't want to shoot these scenes on a soundstage. He wanted to shoot it in the real-life New York City. He even filmed test footage in New York on a camcorder, and a special effects team removed the people to get the eerie feel they were after. Warner Brothers was convinced, but how do you get the city that never sleeps to sleep? Throughout production, they had to carefully plan and prep what they would need to do to make this world look not only empty, but completely barren of human life for years. They weren't even sure how much of the city would be covered in green after 3 years. It would actually be a lot more than depicted in the movie, according to scientists. When filming began in September 2006, the whole shoot was a logistical nightmare. It was the biggest film in the history of New York to that point. The mayor's office was on set almost every day. The police commissioner visited too. New York's ground-level pedestrians would simply be stopped from entering a certain area. They cleared from 57th Street to St. Patrick's Cathedral. That's a few blocks, apparently. They had 350 production assistants, police and security. Traffic was stopped, and for the most part, people were okay with it. But while ground level, they used local law enforcement to stop traffic and redress the streets with strewn cars and random weed and foliage for Will Smith and Abby to walk and drive around, there were still things that needed CG, such as the people high up in their apartments or offices looking out of the windows. They all had to be removed in post-production. But in stark contrast to the sparse New York City streets, the production would end up spending $5 million to film for 6 consecutive nights in January 2007 on the Brooklyn Bridge. 14 government agencies would individually have to approve the shoot, which needed 250 crew members, as well as 1,000 extras and 160 members of the National Guard. Again, everything in the scene was real, except for the destruction of the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge from missiles, obviously. The scene where Neville's wife and daughter are killed in a helicopter crash was especially difficult. It was 3 a.m., extras were freezing cold, everyone was tired, so Will Smith decided to lighten the mood by singing Miami, and apparently everyone loved it. While most New Yorkers were respectful and opened their city to the production graciously, Will Smith would say that he was a controversial figure for some New Yorkers. Quote, "I don't think anyone's going to be able to do that in New York again anytime soon. People were not happy. That's the most middle fingers I've ever gotten in my career," unquote. Parts of the Times Square sequence were shot on sound stages, with the surrounding buildings recreated in CG. They shot Times Square in the 600-foot by 300-foot Kingsbridge Armory in the Bronx. Times Square was being redesigned at the time, and the team got those plans and designed the movie's version of those plans. But if we're going to talk about the CG in this movie, we need to talk about the creatures. And following on from Amalgamated Dynamics makeup tests on the Ridley Scott version of the creatures, Francis Lawrence originally envisioned the actors playing the Darkseekers or Hemocytes wearing prosthetics. The creatures would be nocturnal, with spiked metabolisms and hyperventilation. Casting director Kathleen Chopin sourced a combination of modern dancers, stunt people, parkour performers and acrobats as the Darkseekers, called the Infected in the script. They had to be between 5'10" and 6'1", and under 190 pounds. The original idea was that these people would be of a hive mind, like ants or birds. All of the actors playing the Infected would be shaved top to bottom, and originally the plan was for them to be completely naked, but the studio refused to allow that. They were removed of all body hair though, including on their heads, which for the dancers was especially traumatic to have their heads shaved. These people performed together for the producers, for Will Smith and Francis Lawrence, and their performance terrified everyone. They genuinely looked the part with their physical performance and wearing these prosthetics. Their first shoot was the scene where the Darkseekers run through Washington Square Park, and everyone thought it looked great, except for Francis Lawrence. He didn't find the performances by the actors convincing, and a week into filming, he made a change that would probably be the biggest change made to this movie, a change that would affect post-production and the resulting critical success of the movie. He decided to make the creatures completely CGI, but used the actors they had already hired, primarily Dash Mihok and Joanna Numata, as the motion capture for the CG creatures. The CG was completed by Sony Pictures Imageworks. Many people in the production did believe the change lost some of the grace of hiring such talented dancers and performers by turning them into CGI creatures. And Sony Pictures Imageworks, instead of working from a detailed shot list to produce specific movements to be used in pre-planned shots, the team focused on developing a library of movements that could be edited, turned into animation, and combined with the live action shots later in the production. The movies do occasionally like to mess with viewers, though, with the use of mimes. If you thought the mannequin used to entrap Robert Neville on the street, his name was Fred, by the way, if you thought Fred moved, you may have thought your eyes were playing tricks on you. However, Fred was played in the scene by a mime who was instructed to move ever so slightly to show Neville's deteriorating mental state, but also put the viewer on edge. If you go on YouTube and search for that particular scene in I Am Legend with Fred, you will see he does move. And it is genuinely terrifying to see what you think is a mannequin moving. But segueing to something not at all terrifying, it is time for the obligatory Keanu reference of this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I try and link every movie that I feature with Keanu Reeves for no reason other than he is genuinely the best of all men. And this is a really easy one, surprisingly easy, because as I've already mentioned, Francis Lawrence directed this movie. Francis Lawrence also directed Constantine, which is a very underrated movie just in general, but also a very underrated Keanu Reeves movie. I have done an episode on Constantine. It is a very old episode now, but I really love that movie, and I think Keanu Reeves is great in it, as he is in most of his movies. Not that I'm biased, but that is the easiest way to link Keanu Reeves to I Am Legend. Moving on to the music, though Robert Neville says that he and his wife named their daughter Marley after Bob, not Damien, he holds up a CD calling it the best album ever made. The album is Bob Marley's Legend, which is a greatest hits compilation that was released after Marley's death. The movie features 4 Bob Marley songs: Redemption Song, 3 Little Birds, Buffalo Soldier, and Stir It Up. The score is composed by James Newton Howard, which is used sparingly to add to the quietness of the empty cityscape. Newton Howard would win the Soundtrack Composer of the Year award at the 2008 World Soundtrack Awards. But this is where the story starts to get a little bit difficult for I Am Legend, because not only has I Am Legend completely removed all of its wonderful practical prosthetic creatures, it also quite famously had an original ending. But 1 month before the movie was scheduled for release, last-minute reshoots were ordered. The rumour was that test audiences hadn't liked the ending, which was more faithful to Richard Matheson's original story, which had a downbeat ending for humanity, highlighting the future for the creatures. The original ending of the movie changes the perspectives of the creatures, making Neville the true villain of the story all along. That these creatures aren't just mindless animals, like Neville suggests, but have created their own society, capable of a hierarchy and affection. Lawrence was optimistic about the reshoots, claiming that he liked doing them and that he saw them as a positive thing for the movie. It would lead to a planned release date of the 21st of November 2007 being pushed back to the 14th of December 2007. The original ending would be relegated to the DVD bonus material as an alternative ending. This ending shows Neville realising the error of his ways, returning the female Darkseeker to her people, and the alpha male Darkseeker and the others leaving the house peacefully. Neville abandons his research and heads off in search of a survivors colony with Anna and Ethan. I Am Legend was released domestically in the US on the 14th December 2007 after a lavish premiere with Will Smith, along with his wife Jada Pinkett Smith, and his friend Tom Cruise in attendance, which took place at the WAMU Theatre at Madison Square Garden, New York, on the 11th of December 2007. I Am Legend opened at number 1 at the US box office. It would drop to second in its second week on the release of National Treasure Book of Secrets, but it would stay in the top 10 for 6 weeks. On a budget of $150 million, I Am Legend grossed $256.4 million domestically in the US and $329 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $585.4 million. It would become the 7th highest grossing movie worldwide in 2007 and would have the highest December opening weekend in the US. It currently has a 68% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a critics' consensus of I Am Legend overcomes questionable special effects and succeeds largely on the strengths of Will Smith's mesmerising performance. And critics generally acknowledge Smith's performance, carrying the movie almost solely for its first half, but also noting the collapse of the narrative in the third act and the unconvincing CG creatures. It was also criticised for its Christian imagery, for the theatrical release treating Neville through an almost Christ-like lens. Scientists also criticised the movie for the plausibility of a measles-based virus mutating and spreading in such a virulent way, as well as the depiction of flora and fauna survival in an urban environment. A year after I Am Legend's release, a prequel was already being talked about by Francis Lawrence in 2008, with Will Smith reprising his role, a sort of day one before the infected take over the city. By 2011, the prequel was no longer going ahead. In 2012, Warner Brothers again suggested another installment in the franchise, with Smith reprising his role. In 2014, the studio acquired a script called A Garden at the End of the World, which had similarities to I Am Legend enough for the potential for it to be rewritten as a reboot of I Am Legend. Nothing happened with this either. In 2022, a sequel was officially announced by Warner Brothers, with Will Smith returning as Dr. Robert Neville. Interestingly, this sequel would follow the alternative ending of the movie and not the theatrical ending. Michael B. Jordan would also be joining Smith in co-starring and co-producing, with Akiva Goldsman returning to pen the script. As of recording this podcast, I Am Legend 2 is still in pre-production with no planned release date. A global pandemic, empty streets, the race to find a cure, Batman v Superman, it all seems the stuff of fiction, the stuff of legend. However, somehow, I Am Legend predicted all of those things with startling accuracy. And Will Smith is the best thing in this movie by far, apart from Abby the dog. He genuinely captures the mental anguish of being the last man on Earth. And his downfall is heartbreaking, but also the downfall of his own humanity, as well as his sanity. Smith carries this movie, and it is one of his best performances. As much as I love Arnie, I don't quite think he could have done this. But I think we can all agree the theatrical ending is the wrong ending. For one, how does it lead to Robert Neville becoming the legend implied by the title? In the book, he becomes a legend because his death meant the end of the human race. But this isn't true in either ending of the movie. In one, Neville dies but the cure survives, and in the other, Neville lives. In The Last Man on Earth, The Omega Man, and I Am Legend, the lead character, whether that be Robert Morgan or Robert Neville, is on a personal quest for a cure to a disease he himself is immune to, which suggests that these creatures need to be cured or want to be cured, but they don't. And who decides whether these creatures are to be cured or not? He sees them as a disability to be rectified, not beings capable of their own thoughts and emotions, because human beings are arrogant enough to believe they are the best of all creatures. The fact these creatures set a trap for him after he set a trap for one of theirs should have told Robert Neville they were smart and capable, but somehow, despite him being one of the best scientists in the world, he never wants twigs. Hollywood has always othered everything else. The human protagonists are always right, and the monsters can never be the heroes. It's one of the reasons why I find the work of Guillermo del Toro so compelling, because in many of his movies, the monsters are the heroes. Imagine what he could have done with this material. It's one of those scenarios I wish we could have seen, like his Hobbit movies, for example. Whether these creatures are vampires or zombies remains up for debate, but while we see Neville's fear of these creatures, through his interactions when Sam runs into the dark building, they only attack him after he kidnaps their own. And as we find out, she's the latest in a long line of creatures Neville has killed in the pursuit of a cure these creatures never wanted or asked for, that he believes is the best thing for them. This movie excels at quiet reflection, the screaming solitude, but it fails to show Neville's level of hubris and privilege, and the theatrical ending just takes away from everything he could have possibly learned or recognised to make him the typical Hollywood hero. In many ways, the inclusion of the movie Shrek is interesting, because Shrek is the othered character, the one people fear and want to get rid of. He is the creature in his own movie. The themes of a global pandemic just hit differently in 2025 than they probably did in 2007, now that we're 5 years on from an actual global pandemic that killed millions, and to this day people are still suffering the after effects, whether that's through long COVID, economical status through job loss, or through their own grief and trauma. The scenes of empty New York are eerie. The CG animals look decent enough, but the CG creatures just unfortunately don't look great. And the chances are this was simply down to the amount of time left to the effects teams. And this is something that we know Hollywood is terrible at these days. Chances are it was also still as terrible back then. Richard Matheson died in 2013, and he always viewed I Am Legend as a story of survival and a scientific explanation of vampires. He was critical of the scientific metaphors attached to the meaning of the story, that interpreting it beyond the surface level was a mistake. His book never had a cure or a hero saviour. It's just about the end of a single man's story that was the end of humanity as he knew its story. It's unsurprising that Matheson didn't care too much for this adaptation either. I think this is a movie with so much promise that delivers so much in its first half, and then just quickly seems to race to an unsatisfactory ending. The scenes between Neville and Sam are just superb. The general atmosphere and sense of unease at the potential of these creatures is better than the reveal of them. The man and his dog at the end of the world is the best part. The fact the death of a dog hits harder than the death of Neville's wife and child really tells you everything about where this movie's heart and soul really is. While it's great that Neville gets human companions eventually, they come so close to the end that we don't really get to know them other than they eat his good bacon. Side note, I don't think bacon lasts 3 years unless Robert Neville raised and butchered his own pigs. But throughout the movie, Neville comments on his findings on the creatures, commenting on the fact that typical human behaviour is now absent and social de-evolution appears complete, that they have become truly monstrous. He could be talking about the creatures, or he could be talking about himself and humanity in general. The same humanity who takes great pains to never learn from history and repeat destructive behaviour. Scientists still tamper with the laws of nature and play God. We still create bigger and better weapons. Genetic research has reached a point where we can select embryos without certain disabilities and hereditary conditions. You could see that as a great thing for science, but you could also see that as a stepping point to choosing a child's eye colour, hair colour, gender, sexual preference. The list goes on and on. Humanity does great things, but it also does selfish things. Death is inevitable, but creatures like these are death coming back to haunt us, and that's why they frighten us. Going back to zombie cinema over the decades, and something I've spoken about several times before on this podcast, it's not death that's scary. It's continually living. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on I Am Legend, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast. If you want to get involved and you want to help this podcast grow and reach more people, you could leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. You can find me and follow me. I am at Verbal Diorama on social media. You can like posts, share posts, comment on posts. It all helps. Or you could tell your friends and family about this podcast or about this episode. And if you like this episode of I Am Legend, I would highly recommend episode 216, which was on George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. There are a lot of similarities between Night of the Living Dead and I Am Legend for obvious reasons. But obviously Night of the Living Dead is a seminal zombie classic. And it was such an interesting episode to do and such a truly wonderful movie to cover on this podcast. As always, give me feedback on my recommendations. Let me know if you watched that movie and if you listened to the episode. I would love to hear from you. So the next episode, just because someone likes the same bizarro crap you do, doesn't mean they're your soulmate. 500 Days of Summer was a romantic comedy that was really neither of those things. And yet it seems to summarise dating in a way that most movies just don't. That maybe these are two people who are not destined to be together. That you can be Mr. Right now, not Mr. Right. And maybe Summer Finn isn't the bad guy people think she is. That idealising and romanticising and projecting your wants and desires onto anyone up front isn't the right way to be with someone. Next episode on this podcast, it is the history and legacy of 500 Days of Summer in winter. And yes, the irony of bringing out a podcast episode that specifically says the word summer in the title, but in winter. I get it, but I just really wanted to finally cover this movie. I hope you will join me next episode for 500 Days of Summer. And if you enjoy what I do for this podcast and you want to support an indie podcaster who does all of this on her own, zero help from anyone. It probably sounds like there's zero help from anyone, but genuinely, I do all of this on my own, in my spare time. So if you have some spare change and you want to help out an indie podcaster, you can financially contribute to the upkeep of this podcast. You're under no obligation. This podcast is free and it always will be free. However, if you do get value out of what I do and you have the means to help, you can make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can subscribe to the Patreon at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon. All money made goes back into this podcast by paying for things like subscriptions and hosting and equipment and all of the things that podcasts need to keep going. Huge thank you to the amazing patrons of Verbal Diorama. I could not do what I do without their support. Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Ian, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, So, Kev, Heather, Danny, Stu, Brett, Philip M, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, Philip K, Adam, Elaine, Kyle, Aaron, and Connor. If you want to get in touch, you can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can also go to verbaldiorama.com and fill out the little contact form. I would love to hear from you. If you've listened to an episode recently and you want to tell me about it, if you've watched a movie and listened to the episode recently and you want to talk to me about it, please feel free to get in touch. I would love to hear from you. You can also DM me on social media as well if you wish. And finally,
you were trying to kill yourself last night, right?
Anna.
And I got here just in time to save your life. You think that's a coincidence?
Just stop it.
He must have sent me here for a reason. Neville, the world is quieter now. You just have to listen. If we listen, we can hear God's plan.
God's plan?
Yeah.
All right, let me tell you about your God's plan. There were 6 billion people on Earth when the infection hit. KV had a 90% kill rate. That's 5.4 billion people dead, crashed and bled out dead. Less of 1% immunity. It left 12 million healthy people like you, me, and Ethan. The other 588 million turned into your dark seekers. And then they got hungry and they killed and fed on everybody. Everybody. Every single person that you or I has ever known is dead. Dead. There is no God. There is no God. What is that? Was it still dark when you brought us home last night?
We were bleeding. There was light on the horizon.
Turn the light off. Turn it off. They followed us home.
Bye.